wellnesscouch.com, streaming wellness into your lives.
You're listening to A Quirky Journey, the healthy family podcast with your hosts Jo Whitten and Fuad Kassab. Hello and welcome to A Quirky Journey. Today we have with us a really special guest and a good friend of ours. Hi Fuad. No, you're not the special guest. Sorry. We have Kale Brock. Hi, Kale.
Hey, guys. How you doing?
Good.
Good, Kale. Good to have you on the show, mate.
It's good to finally chat with you guys on air. I feel like we've had so many amazing conversations off air that it was about time we probably recorded one.
Yeah, I think so. And for those of you who may not know who Kale is, if there's any of you out there, Kale is an award-nominated journalist. He's a researcher and a professional speaker. He has qualifications as a health and exercise coach, and he's worked in the health and wellness industry since 2007. And we've all spent a bit of time together at wellness summits and all sorts of things like that. And he's worked with a lot of naturopaths and health personalities in Australia. He's now specialising in the area of gut health and the microbiome. And we have some exciting news to share about what he's been doing recently. So we're really looking forward to hearing about your newest project, Kale.
The Gut Healing Summit.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you, Jo, it's been a very hectic couple of months, I suppose, for me, because I've been dashing off around the country. I've been in Melbourne, Adelaide. I just moved to Sydney, and I've been doing interviews in all those places. Obviously, with the Gut Healing Summit, we decided pretty early on that, I decided I wanted it to be an in-person video format for the interviews, because I'm just a little bit tired of the Skype versions, especially when it comes to a summit. Yeah, I feel like there's lacking that humanism behind a good interview. So I spent a lot of money and went around the country interviewing people with my camera guy, and I think it's been really fantastic, and I'm really glad that we actually invested the time and the effort into actually doing those recordings in person. And I've been speaking with some amazing guests and really finding some consistent messages across the gut health field, but also finding some myth-busting tendencies of some guests as well, which is really, really cool, and finding out some awesome facts along the way. Basically, whenever I do these things, I gave up a long time ago trying to work out who my target audience was and all this sort of stuff. I just sort of said, I'm just going to do these things for me. So I asked the questions that I want to know the answers to, of my guests, and they come up with some really interesting things. Obviously, we've got quite a varied mix. We've got yourself on there. We've got integrative chiropractors and women health specialists. We've got molecular geneticists. We've got microbiologists and naturopaths and counsellors, and a whole bunch more. So it's been a really, really fun experience, and I'm really excited to get it out there and see what people think.
Yeah. Well, before we get into all the details about the summit and what you've learnt through it, could you give us a bit of a background on yourself and how you got into being interested in all of this? Because you're quite young. How old are you, Kale? Are we allowed to ask that?
Oh, are you allowed to ask that?
Well, I don't have to.
No, I'm 25. I'm 25 years old.
Because I know when we first met you, hey Fuad, we were just like, oh my goodness, how does he know so much at such a young age? I think I was still, I don't know what I was doing at that age, but it surely wasn't learning about gut health. So it's very impressive.
Yeah, I just met him like in October, was it, Jo, at the Wellness Summit? Yeah. It was the first time I met him, and I had a quick chat to him because his stall was right next to ours at the Wellness Summit, and then we went in to watch Kale talk, and he was just amazing. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I knew he seemed clever when I talked to him, but then on stage he had such a great presence. He was funny. He was very well educated about his topic, and he delivered it so well. Like, you're definitely one of my favorite speakers at the summit last year, Kale. I really loved seeing you on stage, man. And I thought you were brilliant, and I saw like a really big future for you, especially like knowing that you're 25 years old, and having this kind of ability to hold down your content so well. I was just so impressed, and man, I'm so happy to have you on the show. Really, like to hear what you've got to say. I want to hear more about your story and how you got to know all this stuff at such an early age. So yeah man, would love to.
The first time,
thank you so much.
I just have to mention the first time I heard you speak, I videoed the whole thing on my phone because I was just like, this is amazing. I have to keep this.
I also thought
I'm very
that was a pseudonym that you put on at first. I'm like, why would he call himself Kale? Like,
Kale Broccoli. Your Instagram
Kales
name
Broccoli.
is Kales Broccoli.
More people call me Kale Broccoli now than my real name.
That's right. I suppose you get that question first up a lot. Why? How did you get that name? I guess did your parents like kale?
Yeah, no, well, this is the thing. Like, it was kind of, I describe it as it was the least worst name on Dad's list that Mum could handle. So she said, okay, I can handle Kale. But then Grandma said to Mum, she said, you can't call him Kale. That's a cabbage. But evidently it was quite appropriate. And
it worked out perfectly, didn't it?
I could fight it against it, or I could just go with it, and I'm definitely one for just going with.
No,
I
I think
with that whole Kales broccoli thing.
I think it works well. All the fermented foods and natural health.
Yeah, absolutely. No, but I actually didn't. I wasn't brought up in a very health orientated family. Not that we were exactly unhealthy, we just didn't really think about health the way it's thought about nowadays. It was just kind of food was food, and we didn't grow up with a lot of money, so it had to be affordable. It often had to be made from scratch, and we didn't eat out a lot. But I also was brought up in a mix of between a country town called Port Augusta in South Australia, which is very country. So we used to spend a lot of time on the rocks chasing mud crabs and going fishing. And then I eventually got into surfing. But it wasn't until I was 16, I was diagnosed with supraventricular tachycardia, which is a really long, scary sounding name, but it was called SVT. And this was a heart condition where I would experience arrhythmias to the point where I would actually almost faint. So it's kind of a little bit scary, especially I would experience these arrhythmias out on the footy field or most frequently in the surf. Oh. So being amongst the waves, almost fainting was quite a dangerous situation to be in. No, it's not good. So we went to the doctor and they hooked me up. They sent me home with all these batteries attached to me, like a little portable ECG machine. And nothing happened. I went back and we ended up doing some treadmill running, and I had this little arrhythmia. And they said, yes, we know what that is. It's called SVT. So long story short, I was sitting opposite the cardiologist at Flinders Medical Centre in Adelaide, and they said, look, the only thing we can do is an ablation. And an ablation is where, and he had a little heart figurine on the table in front of me, and he was pulling it apart with his very dexterous hands. And I thought, this is not looking good. And he pulled it open and he was showing me a part of the heart that was malfunctioning, the sinoatrial node. He said, what we're going to do is just burn this away. And immediately little alarm bells went off. I said, I thought this is a little bit illogical. Just because it's not working doesn't mean we should destroy it and attack it. And I suppose that's quite reflective of Western medicine at certain times, at least up until this point. Hopefully we see some changes soon. But at that point, I just sort of said, look, this is quite a drastic situation to be in. I don't want to have heart surgery at the age of 16. Perhaps I can look at nutrition. And he said, no, nutrition's got nothing to do with it. But I was actually at that point introduced to a wonderful naturopath of probably 40 years now, who worked in Adelaide and was a very, very experienced woman, I suppose, influenced by the Campbell McBride School of Thought, and done a lot of training in that. And she was able to teach me quite quickly some basic health principles, which still stick with me today. And I was able to turn that condition around in about 6 months. So as a journalist, it was a big empowering thing. And as a journalist, I had so many questions to ask, and I immediately just went into information saturation, and I completely absorbed myself into health and wellness, probably from the age of about 17, 18 to all the way through to 23. And now I just basically am much more relaxed and slow paced about the health information gathering, and take more of a professional, relaxed approach. But it's all sort of led me to where I am. So, it was almost a blessing having that diagnosis so early on.
I think that's the case with a lot of people that have an amazing knowledge of things. It usually begins with their own issues, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and it's something that's been consistent across nearly all my guests on the summit as well, is that, and anyone I interview on the podcast, in person, it's just most people come into it from their own health crisis. And hopefully we get to a point now where people stop only fixing things once they're broken, and we start looking at things prophylactically. I think that's definitely coming. But and that's why it's important for us to do what we do, to really share a well-rounded message of whole foods and a holistic lifestyle, because we don't want people to get sick before they start becoming interested in wellness.
This is the conversation. Go ahead.
I'm just wondering, you were a journalist at the age of 16. Is that what I gathered as well from
I was a budding journalist back then, so I was commentating the local surf competitions. Wow. I was doing the local surfing podcast, and I was doing a bunch of media with Surfing South Australia. We had a little TV show at one point. We had an online show, so I was doing a bunch of that stuff quite early on. And it wasn't until I was 19 that I became an official journalist at Channel 10, where I worked for 2 years as a reporter for Totally Wild. Yes, so some of you started early. That's what people say. They're like, I get it. Yeah, I did start early, and that was really like media boot camp for me. So I learned so much about, a lot of video production, and that's kind of where my expertise lies now. And that's really where I find flow and passion in life is sharing stories. And for the last 4 or 5 years, it's been sharing that story of the gut and the microbiome, because I felt there was a big gap between what the research was saying and what the practitioners were doing and the everyday person. It was easy to go into a room filled with health personalities and people who are already into health, but I wanted to actually breach the everyday, quote unquote, normal people as well, because I felt they were missing out because we were making that message too esoteric and too hard to approach.
Exactly.
So that's really where I came into it and found that middle ground, and was able to build, I suppose, a bit of a place in the industry.
Well, that's what I think has been so needed, and that's what, my passion has been also, and Fuad's, just really getting this message in a down-to-earth way to people so that they can actually implement changes, because they just, hearing all this stuff and reading about it in articles is one thing, but trying to actually put it into practice is another.
Yeah, and it's such an important step. I feel like so many people now are very interested in learning more and more and more, but not enough people are actually doing and applying that information. I get emails or social media comments every single day from people saying, hey, where did you train? Where should I go and learn? Where should I go and learn? And that's fine. But I also think that we have access to so much information now. We literally have a university degree at our fingertips on iTunes, so at what point do we actually say, how can I start applying this information and creating a bit of a clean program for myself or other people? And I think we're getting closer there. I think we're bound to reach a point where people start acting instead of just listening.
Yeah.
When someone like you's been looking at this for as long as you have, I bet at first, you go through those emotions of being like really shocked about like how wrong everything was when, and how the world's doing things. But as you progress and you learned all these things, and now you've kind of slowed down on the learning, that shows to me that there's been some kind of philosophy that's emerged in the way that you view things. Like you've sort of bedded down a view or a lens through which you see health holistically. Am I right? And if so, can you share a little bit with us about what your philosophy is at a high level before we go down into the detail?
I mean, that's the best question to ask me, basically. And I just love that, and you're very insightful.
Yes.
Absolutely. I feel like I reached a point where I noticed a lot of, I mean, if I'm being completely honest here, I did notice a lot of disparity between certain health personalities in what they shared and how they actually acted in quote unquote real life. And
yeah.
And there was, I think there was a moment, and I think Dr. Damien Christoph had a big influence on me when I saw how relaxed his approach was to health and wellness, and how he, to sum it up, and I suppose this is quite new to me, which is why I'm almost struggling for words. But Damien summed it up in our interview. You've got to love your parasites to death, sort of thing. And I think that, I released something the other day on Facebook that was something like, you can't actually attack the body into wellness. You've actually got to nourish and love the body into wellness. And it's different for everyone.
That's good.
Because when I started, I was very heavily influenced by people like David Wolfe, who was, obviously quite a staunch raw vegan. And, that was my thing at the start. And my whole thing was like, well, everybody's got to be raw vegan. But what I didn't realize is that everybody is different, and there are so many factors involved in health. And this is another thing that I'm learning, is that food is just one part, and albeit I think it's a relatively small part of the overall holistic health equation. If we look at cultures who are living really long lives and are really happy and don't have words for depression or cancer, some of their diets don't look all that healthy to us. The Maasai live off 95% fermented dairy, and they mix a little bit of ox blood in there, and we've got the Hunzas having, a lot of goats products, and they're having wheat and grains and all these things that were in complete contradiction to what I was learning. So I had to really take a step back and take more of a stance or more of a position as a learner and a storyteller, as opposed to someone who was going to actually give advice and give concrete ideas. I suppose a journalist's job is to almost sit in the grey area and actually share both sides of the story in what is hopefully a balanced way. And, you're right. Of that journey, I was completely shocked with what the medical industry were doing to people, and how the staunch ignorance / arrogance in that industry was disgusting. But what I think I closed myself off to was looking at all the positive things that some of those individuals in that industry are doing as well. So I think once I stood back and said, hey, why don't I just be an observer, and why don't I just actually allow my strengths to really drive where my career goes, and I always landed back on storytelling and explaining potentially complicated things in an everyday human sort of way. And once I did that, all the pressure came off, and I didn't feel like I had to read every single research paper. I didn't feel like I had to read every single book or listen to every single podcast and memorize the facts and the figures about the amount of vitamin A in goji berries and what they were going to do to your human growth hormone levels and all that different thing, all those different things. I just sort of said, hey, let's take a step back and just relax and
I love that.
And share what is hopefully a nice, well-rounded story that inspires people to take action, rather than just sit back and and wonder why the media are bashing Pete Evans and all this sort of different stuff, to actually just sit back and say, hey, is there any merit in both sides of the story, and how does it apply to me, and what can I do to actually act on this information if I want to? I hope that answers it, but it's definitely a very big, that topic has a big presence in my life. So nice job.
That's the sort of thing that we've been talking about recently a lot too, haven't we, Fuad?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, and you're right, yeah, like you will go into the details first and try to understand all these, like, micronutrients, macronutrients, trace minerals, everything from, like, circadian rhythm and, cycles and all that kind of stuff. And then at the end of it, you'll come out and go, wow, well, that was really important to learn, and really a really good foundation in biology and understanding at a small level. But that's also, that we've inherited this approach from a reductionist society that always wants to look at things in their small part, never steps, back enough to look at the whole picture. And the whole picture for us, at least for me, and I know Joe shares my view to an extent, but we look back at, Western civilization and all the countries that follow suit now. They have a disconnect between themselves and their relationship to nature and the planet, and from that creates societal structures that, for instance, will spray food with pesticides, or they will import foods from different countries and create a massive carbon footprint because of it, or they would put chlorine in the water, and they would make you fearful of the sun. And because of that, they create a toxic environment where the human being that's born into it is born into, like, a world of amnesia, where they don't actually know that there's actually an alternative, or there's a better idea of how to go about doing things, and they take part of this society, and they start seeing the toxic environment making its impact on their own biology, and then their biology, will manifest in different ways. Autoimmune diseases, diabetes, heart disease, cancers, all these kinds of things will start coming up. Even, kids will have things like eczema, and all these things will cause that issue for the human being, and then they'll start, having to go to the doctor, and the doctor will want to sort of burn off a part of their heart for them, and say, look, this is what needs to happen for you. And unless you sort of take your education in your own hands and go down that path, you go down the path, of course, from where your culture has taught you to go down the path of the small parts, like, kicking in together, and you see a bigger picture. And that's the place where you feel more comfortable, because you're no longer struggling to look at the small parts anymore, because they're a lot to keep track of. Like, if all these balls are up in the air, but once the picture is complete, it's definitely a better place for us. And this is the picture. This is the part that Joe and I talk about as well, as we talk about a return to health through the larger picture as well. Because we're not doctors, for one thing. We've made our own journey to, talk about the, looked at the smaller parts. We don't have a medical degree, but the big picture is what helps and inspires people. Like, I'm not going to inspire people by talking to them about, like, iron levels and that kind of stuff, but
Exactly. I think stories sell and facts tell. So the more, and I think you're completely right. I think adding on to that, I think we're very distracted nowadays from things that I suppose are quite important to our innate intelligence, if you will, like having purpose and having a relationship with nature and having a sense of community and being nourished with real food is so rare these days, and that disconnect I don't think is by accident. We're very distracted now, and that left brain dominance is, I suppose, coming from various factors. We've all got our phones now, and it's harder to switch off. There's so many things demanding our attention, so it's very easy to slip into that habit of learn more, do more, whereas often the most powerful things we can do for our health come from doing less. I'm completely in alignment with that.
Yeah.
So if someone came to you today, Kale, and said, "Look, man, I want to be healthier," what would you say? What's your large picture? What's the big picture for you?
The first question I've started asking is what's your purpose? What's your overarching dream, and what's your goal? Because I think without something to anchor to attain health and wellness anyway, and this is what I write about in, I've written about on my blogs and in the book as well, is that you've got to have a why. And not just a why to get healthy, you've got to have a why to wake up in the morning.
Yeah.
And, I suppose a lot of people find, and I was speaking with my friend Nick about this, who's a holistic lifestyle coach, yesterday. I had him over for dinner and I said, what's the number one thing that you see affecting people's lives in a negative way? And he said 99% of people just have no sense of purpose and have no sense of joy and love for what they do each day. And that to me is a huge tragedy, because I could talk about eating whole foods and getting on bone broth and working out your gut health, which is incredibly important. But if you don't have a reason to do that, and you think you do, but unconsciously your mind is so unfulfilled and unstimulated with the typical doldrums of a 9 to 5 job that you're not happy with, or relationships that you're not happy with, then all of that's going to be almost pointless in a way, because you're going to self-sabotage. You're not going to have a reason to want to do that and to want to thrive and have vitality. And I think that's, like my friend Nick said, it's one of the biggest things affecting us, is that we are actively encouraged almost to actually settle for less than what we actually want. And we're told to do all the have tos instead of the want tos. And that was something I decided to prioritize early on. When I finished school, I did really well at school in year 12. I was dux to my school, and it was like, go to university, go and do all these things. You could become a doctor, you could do all these things. And my first instinct was, I don't want to do those things. I wanted to go surfing. So I packed up my old Toyota Hiace, 1986 Toyota Hiace, and actually travelled Australia, living in the back of my van for almost a year. So, I think, I don't know if I was lucky to be exposed to different ideas early on, but I think that constant driving force of questioning and constantly checking in with my heart, if you will, or subconscious, or whatever you want to call it, and whether I'm actually on path with my highest values and my overarching dream, which, to be honest, surfing has a big role to play there. Constantly checking in there has enabled me to really stay on topic and have a reason to do what I do every day. So if someone came to me and said, hey, what should I do to get healthy? I'd say, well, what's your reason for getting healthy? What's your overarching dream in life?
That's really good.
Well, this is one thing that I find a lot of people, you put them in that place and they'll just give you like I just want to just buy a house and be my family, or that's I just want to, because they've never really thought that they have an alternative to their life, that whatever calling is inside them to achieve things that are more personally fulfilling to them, that's been sort of shoved to the side ever since they were children, and they don't know that the spark that is there. How do you get them to change their view and to actually see that there is something else that they should be looking for inside themselves?
I think there's some key questions to ask, and one of those questions, and Alan Watts, who's an old philosopher, puts it nicely, is what would you do if money were no object? If money didn't matter, what would you spend your time doing? I think that is a really important leading question. And for me, it's I'd probably just go surfing all day and do a lot less work than what I do now.
Swim, lay in the sun.
So it would be quite different, but at the same time, just coming from this personally, I enjoy the intellectual stimulation and the creativity challenge that comes with working for yourself and doing what I do. So I do love that as well. So I think those questions, that what would you do if money didn't matter? is a really important thing, and it often really stumps people. People sit there and go, "Wow, well, I don't even know." And I also ask, "What do you daydream about? What do you think about all the time? What's at the front of your mind that you really want to do? What excites you?" Is a really good question. Some people say, "Well, it's travel." Some people say, "Well, it's family," which is completely fine. Maybe it's lawn bowls or tennis for you. Whatever it is, find it and do more of it. And I think as soon as you commit to doing that, you're immediately going to come from a better place, health-wise, because remember, our mind and our bodies are so connected. Chinese medicine doesn't even separate the two. Once we've checked off that box and said, yeah, I'm going to start fulfilling myself every day and I'm going to live on path, and that path can change, by the way, then, it's much easier to get the health right. When I was working as a health coach, which I don't anymore, I saw it a lot. I saw people who were absolutely struggling to find a reason to get healthy. So now it's changing. I think this topic is becoming a lot more popular to talk about, and hopefully, with these sort of conversations, we start to see people actually taking a stand, because it's not encouraged enough. And I suppose that's where the school system failed, and I think that's why I never went to university, because I didn't want to be shaped into a mold that wasn't going to fit me and who I was.
It reminds me of something that I talk to my kids about. You can get so caught up in the details, like you were saying earlier, that everything becomes so overwhelming. And, with kids doing school, it's like you say, you can get so caught up in I have to learn these facts, I have to learn these figures. And at the end of the year, they just dump them because they don't actually need them. And the overall life is not being learnt, the things that really are important in life. And there's a little poem that I taught my kids. I don't know if you've heard of it. I've just got to say it right. It's a centipede was happy until a toad in fun said, "Pray, which leg comes after which threw her mind in such a pitch she lay bewildered in the ditch, considering how to run." And I thought that really fits, because, people can get so caught up with I've got to do this, I've got to make the bone broth, I've got to make sure it's done at this time, I've got to make sure I take these probiotics, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. And they, of course, like you say, that stuff is important. But if that's what's filling your mind constantly, it just becomes very overwhelming, and you end up just crashing in a heap. And life isn't, what are you doing it for? Like you say, what are you doing it for? Make sure that you've got that purpose behind it. And for us, I know the purpose for us was to get Isaac better, and to see him growing and getting better every day just made it worthwhile. But now we can relax. Now we've got a much more relaxed way of eating, and a way of, dealing with the health issues that arise because we've done the hard yards. But yeah, what I'm trying to say is there's times where, yes, you have to do focus on all those details. And what you're saying is, as long as you have a good purpose and a good reason behind it, it's worth doing. Am I right?
Yeah, and I think if you take on the idea that your health and wellness is a really powerful tool to help you achieve your dreams, it's not, health and wellness isn't the end result.
That's right. It's not the end.
It's a lifelong journey, and there's
not health for health's sake.
No, exactly. And there's no finish line. This is the thing. There's no finish line. At some point, you're not going to go, "Oh, I'm healthy. Well, that was a fun ride, and now I'll go back to the burgers."
That's right.
It's not. Yeah, it's got to be. It's a lifelong thing. So make it sustainable, make it enjoyable, and have a reason for doing it.
And there'll be times where you have to go full blast, but then you can slow down again and focus on the big picture.
Yeah, exactly.
There's also something to be said about, like, when you couple the two together. Like, even, for instance, you don't know exactly what your purpose is, and you don't know where you want to go, but you feel that there's some kind of stirring inside you that's asking you to change things. We give these things like a term in, our countries, where we call them like something like a midlife crisis or something like that. Like, you actually get to a point like their life has gone so far off track where there's a complete meltdown internally for them that's just trying to say, well, you're not living out your purpose, and try to fix things, and then but a lot of people don't even know what the purpose is anymore, because they've ignored it for the major part of their life. So it's really hard to sort of try to find out what it is. And I find that even just knowing that they should be looking for a purpose, and that's the first step, is try to find your purpose. And in the meantime, if you couple it with a healthy diet where you're trying to get your body in good shape, there's a fog that gets lifted off you, where you start becoming more clear as well, and you'll be able to take steps towards even uncovering what your purpose is and what your true passion is. Because you might have sort of been, like, let's say you like, I don't know, climbing mountains or something, but because your health has been so bad that you've never even thought that it's possible. You thought, I'd never be able to go climb mountains, and then you put that idea to the side. But you start eating well, and all of a sudden you get like this kindling of hope inside you, where you can start discovering what a purpose might look like. And you can have many purposes as well, not just the one, but definitely these things work synergistically, and the purpose reinforces the healthy eating, and the healthy eating reinforces purpose. So your purpose as you find it now, is to be the storyteller. Yeah, is that right?
It's definitely a leading fundamental sort of pillar in my life at the moment. And I say at the moment because I am very open to that changing over time. But no, the telling stories, and the whole reason I do this, I'll tell you, is when I sit here at the computer and I finish an edit, or we finally finish the score and the audio on a clip or whatever it is, and you look back at that clip and you get tingles watching it. That's the whole reason for me doing that part of what I do. So I think just how, and what's so funny is that it's so rare to get that moment. Like, it's not like you experience that every day. No. Yesterday I was probably 6 interviews deep, editing, and you're in flow, but you're not on purpose at that point. But those tiny moments, and this is so similar to surfing, those tiny moments where you experience absolute joy, and there's that alignment between your heart and your brain and the universe, that's really the whole thing for me, is to chase those moments. And I find them in surfing, and I find them in storytelling and being on stage, getting tingles, listening to people or talking. It's those little moments where I'm completely in flow. The whole reason to live for me. So that's why I wake up in the morning, to find those sneaky little moments of flow, and then spend the next 400 hours trying to find the next one. So it's a wonderful game, and it demands a lot of presence, and I think it also demands a lot of relaxation and concentration at the same time. And I'm so fortunate to do what I do, and to be aware of this. I mean, I don't know, this did come about through a lot of self-exploration, but I've had a lot of amazing teachers along the way as well. I feel very blessed and lucky to be doing what I'm doing, and sharing the stories I'm sharing, and looking towards a career that's going to be very fun and fantastic, I'm sure. So I'm very, very lucky and happy to be where I am.
Well, we want to know more about the stories that you've gathered for the Gut Health Summit. So do you want to start telling us a little bit about what you've been learning, who you've been interviewing? Maybe give us a few snippets, a few previews.
Yeah, well, I didn't tell you this, but the guys would have listened to the little audio sting at the start of this podcast, I'm assuming, because I'm going to send that to you. Yes. So they would have heard the audio trailer. But what's been really great is finding consistent messages amongst the guests, because I didn't want to create a summit that just left people in that overwhelmed scenario. Yeah. So it was really interesting to find that a lot of guests were very emphatic on the whole foods message.
That's good.
And to at least start with whole foods when it comes to your gut health. And this was from people like Dr. Margie Smith, who's a molecular geneticist. Yeah.
Wow.
So she works for Smart DNA, and she does microbiome testing. And she was sharing some messages that were really interesting. She was saying how there were some big paradoxes. She found that through the testing, there were people who were doing colonic irrigations who were coming out of those colonics with a rapidly fluxing microbiome that was very unhealthy. But she found that some people who were healthy, who had a colonic, came out with a much more stable, healthy microbiome. And she was saying how the paleo diet is often talked about as being anti-inflammatory, but she found that in some people it was quite inflammatory. And, that whole foods diet, people who were having foods from various food groups and unprocessed whole foods had very healthy looking microbiomes. And that was echoed across most of the guests, but I also am very aware that a lot of people now need, a little bit more, Joe. Like obviously with your situation, if you guys went on a whole foods diet, it still wouldn't have had the impact that GAPS did for you.
I guess we were about 80 to 90% whole foods, and the rest was like the cheating, sneaky things when kids were out. But and things went downhill quick just with that. Yeah,
exactly. So there is a need, I think, for more of an intense or skewed sort of approach to gut health, because a lot of people have been damaged now largely by antibiotics and various other medical interventions which we experience when we grow up, often out of our control. So during those times we see a very damaged microbiome. So it was interesting to find that a lot of people's approach was very similar to GAPS, with various little tweaks here and there that seemed to work a little bit better. And what was also really consistent that I really liked was, be specific about it. If you've got health issues, do some testing and be specific. And if you've got parasites, well, maybe those parasites are there for a reason. And rather than looking at attacking those parasites, maybe look at nourishing and loving the gut so much that you create an environment where only the good guys can grow, rather than actually coming in and taking what is essentially a Western medical approach, but just using herbs instead. So that was really interesting. And then looking at obviously fermented food and whether that's appropriate for people who are gut healing. I recently did an update of the gut healing protocol book, which is you guys know what it's like, trying to bring out a book. The second update of the book has a big emphasis on the difference between a gut nourishing diet and a gut healing diet. And this is what the guests were very heavy on, because what they found, and I think what's really powerful when you speak with practitioners who are working every day with clients, is that you get a lot of feedback. Anecdotal evidence, which is so incredibly important. And that was that not one protocol worked for every person. So they had to be specific and say, okay, look, you've got a little bit of healing to do. Let's restrict the diet momentarily or temporarily, and then look at doing something like a whole foods approach down the line once we get the results that we're after. So it was very interesting to find that, and then obviously follow up with some interesting questions about different specific interventions. And one of my favorite conversations was with Dr. Andrea Huddleston, who's from the Wellness Women, who's also on the Wellness Couch, and she was talking about how much the hormones are affected by gut health. So a lot of women's hormonal issues are coming from the gut. If we're doing liver detoxes instead, but if you don't heal the gut, your liver is always going to retoxify anyway. So you can do 40 liver detoxes a year, but until you heal and seal that gut lining, there's always going to be junk moving into the bloodstream, which the liver has to filter, and then it's going to get congested. So coming back to the the original cause of what's going on was really important. She also, I think one of the biggest things, and I shared this little preview on the Facebook page, was how she talked about how different men and women respond to different stresses. So she was saying how women, when they have stress, whether it's physiological stress or chemical stress or emotional stress, or especially stress coming from the gut, so physical stress, their antibody levels go sky high, whereas men, rather than their antibodies going up, their inflammation goes up. And that hormonal difference is quite stark. So we also saw that, and she was sharing this, that when men are stressed, they close up because they actually want to, and, this is emotionally and physically, right? They don't want to talk about their issues. But this is essentially they're talking about this as a function to actually protect the level of testosterone flowing through the bloodstream. But when that stress gets impacted and estrogen levels get too high, it can actually cause aggressive behavior. So previously we thought that it was increased testosterone levels associated with aggressive behavior in men, but it's actually too much estrogen.
Wow.
So like little things that for me are so fascinating to talk about and hear from these expert guests, and to be able to ask follow-up questions on those things and work out like which probiotic is going to settle down the gut, and how do we work out which strain is going to be good for this, and our fermented food's good for candida, and all these different things is really nice. And also just coming at it from the point of going, what's the everyday person gonna want to ask here, and what are they going to want, and how can they actually put this information into action? Having those principles as a leading pillar of that work, I think really helps make it tangible, because a lot of these online summits, at least the ones I've listened to, you almost have to have a background in health or a medical degree to understand.
Yeah.
So
and it's easy to let your mind wander because it just gets too heavy.
Exactly. So I didn't want it to do that. I wanted to, once again, breach that area between the medical experts, the medical experts, and the researchers and the everyday person as well. Because I think practitioners have so many insights that we probably underappreciate, because again, when they're working with people every day, they start to see big trends, macro trends in how people respond to different things, and the insights you can get from those practitioners is so incredible. Much more powerful, I think, than an ideas person sharing ideas online. I think it's much more important to listen to people who are in the trenches getting the work done. So that's what we tried to achieve, and I think we did achieve it, and the interviews are beautiful. I actually was looking at your interview the other day because I chose to edit all the interviews, and yours was particularly nice from a cinematography point of view. It was filmed very well. Yeah, so I really enjoyed watching your interview because it was just very, very clean and nice. So
good.
it was very good.
Hey, Fuad.
Good hair, Dave.
I don't suck at TV anymore. So a couple of years ago, when my first book came out, I had to do some YouTube clips with Thermomix, and I was exhausted, and it was the first time, and it was a whole day of filming, and I was tired and hungry and cold, and I did really badly. I couldn't even smile by the end of it. No, it was shocking. And Fuad looked at it and he goes, "Jo, you suck at TV." So I never let him forget that.
But no, like, since you've done, for instance, the online gut health program, the videos there are fantastic. I was so impressed. I'm like, oh my God.
Thank you.
You've done all right. Redeem yourself, Jo.
Good.
I trust that you can get in front of a camera and do well, so I'm happy for you.
The trick there is you've just got to speak to the cameraman and be really good friends with the cameraman, and then everything's easy once you've got those. That
does make a big difference. So, and also, chatting with you, Kale, is easy. Whereas if you're, if everyone's just looking at you and you're speaking on your own, I think that is more difficult.
it's definitely a little bit trickier. It's a very unique skill, I think, being able to talk to camera.
Yes.
And yeah, I saw one of the clips that you shared, and I thought it was fascinating. But I was talking about capsules versus powdered probiotics, like having it straight.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So that was with John Ellerman, who's a microbiologist, and we talked about how basically what you said, the difference in efficacy from between probiotic capsules and probiotic powders. Now, John's argument, and John's very, very funny and very dry with his humour. So he says, look, in the nature of science is that I can only share with you what we know so far, and chances are that next year I could be proven wrong, but that's called science. But basically his argument was that when you take a probiotic capsule, it actually is forced to when it enters the stomach, so it will do that by sucking in a lot of hydrochloric acid, for instance, and that can actually kill off a large number of the different probiotics in the capsule. Whereas if you he said you can coat it with something, I think called Uridant or something like that. You can coat it, but then it actually, the same issue occurs, but in bile, which is obviously very alkaline, which obviously skews the probiotics as well, because especially lactobacillus bacteria who love acid. That's what lactobacillus means, acid duric, which means they endure acid. And then he said the best way that he found to do it, and he did a lot of testing on pigs at the CSIRO in the Dairy Research Centre, they were using probiotics, and they used to boost the probiotics with a prebiotic in water, so it was hydrated, and that actually was better able to flush through the system in very high numbers, and it would still come out in the poo samples that they tested. So that was John's.
Like put raw potato starch mixed with probiotics and water, and you down that? Is that sort of?
No, he was using fructooligosaccharides and inulin, which are two prebiotics shown to be quite beneficial. But he also broke down, and this is very interesting, Joe. Both of you guys would be very interested in this. He also broke down how amongst those generalized umbrella terms such as Lactobacillus acidophilus, there are actually a lot of substrains of probiotics. So you've got like the B52 strain, you've got the C blah, 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 and all these different strains, and that some of them actually stimulate the growth of bad bacteria in the gut. And they actually did some research at the Department of Primary Industries, and John just sent me through the graph. And he had the results, and there was a Lactobacillus rhamnosus strain that was actually the worst out of them all, and it actually drove the numbers high of pathogenic microbes. But again, at the same time, there was a Lactobacillus rhamnosus strain. So this is the same exact name that you'll probably see on a label, but a different substrate. The other end of the graph at suppressing the pathogenic bacteria. So, just those little things can have a big impact on your everyday health decisions, and informing the consumer to make an empowered decision is quite easy to do when you have people like yourself and John Ellerman, who's, like I said, very dry, will tell it how it is on the summit. Yeah.
Well, I found it interesting too. I can't remember who it was you were interviewing, and I think it was a lady, and she was saying how the microbiome can switch very quickly. Because you sort of think of it as something that you've got to work on for ages to work on rebalancing your microbiome. So was she saying that it actually can be done very quickly?
That's Dr. Margie Smith. That's in the trailer, and people would have heard that at the start of the interview. She is a molecular geneticist who runs Smart DNA, which is a microbiome testing company down at, I think they're at Monash in Melbourne. Don't quote me on that. But we're working with them on the Gut Movie, the documentary. And very interesting. And she was saying how from the results or from the testing they've done, you can quite significantly shift the population of the microbiome within about 48 hours. But she also said that when you skew the diet in any way, you do affect the microbiome in a big way, and it will adapt to what you're eating. You know, Tim Spector did some funny research. He's a UK professor, Tim Spector, UK-based researcher, and he had his son actually follow a processed foods diet for a week. So he ate McDonald's 3 times a day.
Oh, wow.
And he found that he had a 70% reduction in his microbiome diversity by day 4 or something. So a huge shift in the microbiome. And what I'm trying to do with the documentary is to work out whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. You know, does our microbiome shift and adapt to different diets to save our life, or does it shift and adapt and actually cause detriment to us? And, you know, will this explain how we have cultures such as the Inuits living off a full fat and protein diet with no starches to feed them microbes, if you will, according to the CSIRO. But how do they survive and thrive on their primal diets? Is it the microbes actually shift into what we would look at and say typically is a weird, skewed, unhealthy microbiome, but in doing so help them exhibit such fantastic health results? So it's a very interesting topic, and I think that something else that has come out of interviewing all these experts is the fact that we don't know as much as we think we do about the gut and the microbiome. There's still so much to learn, and there are so many species to discover, and the future of medicine is going to be probiotic based. I mean, actually, I don't even think that it already is going to be that way. We've got pharmaceutical companies trying to develop their own strains of probiotics now. It's going to be a very, very interesting and I suppose somewhat turbulent time over the next 10 years as we race to discover what is truly an optimal microbiome and whether one even does exist.
Sounds like everybody, like all the different cultures, have their own version. So
they do, and you know, if we're going to run with that principle, things just work for different people, don't they? So it'll be very interesting to have a look at that in depth.
Wow,
fascinating! I'm looking forward to it. So when will we be able to have a look at the Gut Health Summit?
So the Gut Healing Summit is airing. Yeah, it's airing at the end of March. This is how disorganized I am. It's the last week of March, so it's the 27th that it starts airing, and it'll finish on the 30th or the 31st of March. So we'll be doing the typical sort of summit style in that way, that we will air the interviews for free for 1 day at a time. And then people can actually purchase lifetime access and get a bunch of bonuses and things like that as well, the transcripts and the audio files as well if they want them by purchasing that lifetime access. So that's the way, we've done it. But I suppose, Joe, Joe and Fide, you guys will be able to sort of send out some links on Facebook, perhaps?
Yeah, we can do that, definitely. We can put a link on the show notes.
Sure.
So that people can figure out where to go. That will be
absolutely
good. Yeah. And if you go to your Facebook page, which is how do they find your Facebook page? Because you've got 2 Kale Brock.
I think you can just search. Kale Brock. Okay. I mean, everybody just decides to add me as a friend these days. So
I know that's what happens. You end up with 2,000 friends.
Yeah. And I just end up accepting everyone. But if you also like the public page, which is just facebook.com/Kales Broccoli.
That's what I was wondering. Kales Broccoli.
That's the one. You can see all the previews, like little interview snippets of really interesting stuff. And you can see the trailer, which we've been working on for a while, which is really, really cool and powerful. So there's a bunch of stuff you can check out there. But it's also, you get a lot of behind the scenes stuff if you jump on my social medias, like Instagram and stuff as well. Yeah,
it's good fun.
Yes, absolutely.
You don't suck at TB, Kale. You're very good.
Thank you.
Anything this bloke is amazing.
He is. He is. No, we really recommend that you guys all go and have a look at this because it's going to be very fascinating. And like Kale says, it's done so well. It's not one of these, Skype camera type deals. It's the real deal. So
thank you. Thanks very much, guys.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Kale. I'm really looking forward to watching it all. It'll be great.
Thank you. And thanks for being a part of it. And thank you guys for letting me come on your wonderful, most popular show on the Wellness Couch.
You're welcome.
No, it's a pleasure to have you, Kale. And I'll catch you next couple of weeks for a bushwalk in the Blue Mountains and a dip into the freezing Minnehaha Falls, hopefully.
Oh, lucky you.
Mate, that is a vlog in itself. I'm going to bring my camera for that one.
You watch. He'll jump off that cliff, Claude. You watch.
Of course he will.
I want to see that on the vlog, all right?
Yeah. I'll do camera work.
Lovely. I look forward to it.
Well, thank you so much.
Guys,
and everybody, thank you for listening. And have a look at the show notes, and there will be the links there for you to click through to Kale's Gut Healing Summit. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/The Wellness Couch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives. Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.